This is the third video that I've made about my experiences of Bapak in dreams. These have been very significant. They've had very significant effects on how I view the world and how I view my life. And they've been, to a great extent, they've been guiding principles of how to live. This last one, the setting for it was just recently. It was in Ramadan 2020, only a month or two ago. And it was a short dream, but very vivid, very clear. And to a certain extent, I hesitate to talk about it because I don't have the perspective of time that I had on the other experiences. But what the hell? The venue for the dream was a Subud meeting in a hall, theatre style. I wasn't shown what the purpose of the meeting was, but there was a stage, and Bapak came onto the stage, and it was as if he'd been away for a long time, and it's like he'd been called back. And because the first thing he said is, "Where is everybody?" And I looked around the hall. I suppose it was about half full, something like that. And the second thing he said was, "Why isn't anybody having adventures?" And then he looked at me, he said, "What's your name?" I told him it was Lucas. He said, then he said, "I can see, Lucas, that you and your friends have received about 60% of what I've received. And therefore, I'd like you to do something. I'd like you to invent something." Okay, Papa. And he said, "I'd like you to invent Arrowism." And Arrowism is you pick the target, you find something useful, important, that you find important, you think is important to do, and you are the arrow. And that is Arrowism. And that was the end of the dream. So there are a few things to say about that. One was about, from Bapak's perspective, his first impression of us was that there were fewer of us than he had expected, and we were not very active, in fact, inactive. And it's interesting what he said about adventures. I've not heard this before. You've never mentioned it in any of his talks that I was aware of. But it's made me think about adventures as opposed to enterprises. I think it's interesting. Adventures are something that appeals, I think, universally. People understand about having an adventurous life. To a much lesser degree, people understand about being enterprising. Certainly in the West, the semantics of enterprising or being an enterprise or starting an enterprise is inevitably connected with business, making a profit. And with many people, particularly who sort out a spiritual way, are not really interested in business because they see that as being, stay away from that. But having an adventure is quite different. So I think that's a point that I'll expand on in a little while. So the other thing you were saying, was specifically saying you felt that Lucas and your friends, it wasn't just me, but maybe you referring to the majority of the people in the room, I don't know, is that you received 60% of what I've received. And 60% is interesting. As I say, it's more than halfway, but it's a long way short of your potential. And I think that thinking about that positively, I think, well, actually, maybe there's things that we can do now when we've had 50 years of doing this Latihan. Well, it's maybe things we can do now that we couldn't do 50 years ago. And so I think that was an interesting point. But there's plenty more to be done. There's plenty more that we can do. So I think I need to touch on, what does it mean about being adventurous? And I think this is about what is it to live a spiritual life. It really goes deeper than that. What it is to live a spiritual life? Is it to be quiet? Is it to find nirvana, or is it to find fulfillment in action? And I think it's the latter. And I think this is what attracted me in the first place to Subud was two things. One was the direct contact with Grace, and the second was that it was an environment of being enterprising and being active in the world. And I think if I boil these two things down to two basic twin attributes, it is surrender on the one side and action on the other side. But this is what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be harmonizing this thing which has not really been harmonized before. We normally think of spiritual people or religious people as being focusing on that. They're focusing on the spiritual, they're focusing on meditation or being quiet or finding some resource inside themselves or worshipping and whatever, but outwardly, other than observing the religious practice or the spiritual practice, there's no particular thing that they're doing in terms of being active. But I think this is the message that Bapat was actually trying to convey in the many talks that he gave. And if I have a memory of his talks, the ones that I listened to, they would usually find me asleep after about a minute or two, and I'd wake up towards the end. So all I kind of remembered was brothers and sisters of the spiritual brotherhood of Subud. And then I'd wake up and it would be, and that's the reason why it's important to do enterprises. So these two things were the beginning, and the one followed the other, and they're linked together. And I think this is the thing that I think is new. This is the thing that I think is that we have to balance these things. We have to balance this way of being active and being open to grace at the same time. This is something which is not really been focused on. And this particular thing of having an adventure, being adventurous, it's very interesting, and I just have the feeling that maybe everybody needs to be adventurous. A friend of mine made this quotation. I don't know where he got it from. The other day was that if you're breathing and you're above the earth, there are still adventures to be had. So it's an attitude of mind of being positive and active. And I think from a philosophical point of view, guidance comes to us, or can come to us, when we're doing stuff. I think the higher forces are able to penetrate and guide us if we supply the energy. They can't do that if all we do is sit around watching TV, or sitting, under a tree going or practicing any form of mysticism or hypnotism or whatever. So I think this requirement to be active is something which is fundamental. And I won't go into it deeply now, but the other major experience that I've had was being taken to the world of 300 years in the future, where it was commonly understood that it was indeed the requirement of every human being to be adventurous, to have an adventure, to go out and do stuff, and also at the same time be open to grace. And this combination, as I implied in the last video that I did, this combination of surrender and action, in the end, is what leads you to have a good time. And a good time is when we're fulfilling our destiny. And this is the destiny of man now in the 21st century, to harmonize these two things of surrender and action. So this is Taoism. This is something that we can all do. We can all find something to focus on that we feel is important. And to be the arrow. And if you can't find somebody to be, that in yourself, search out people to work with so that collectively you can be the arrow. So I think that's all I wanted to say about this stream. So I hope you have found my dreams and my understanding of the dreams interesting. So thank you for watching. It's been a pleasure to do them. Okay, bye.